years ago, we went to the Philadelphia Auto Show, and I had one of those memorable experiences when you go somewhere. Did you ever have one of those? But this year it tended to be in the most unusual place. Have you ever been in an elevator? How many of you been in an elevator? Have you been in a crowded elevator? You know, one that's really crowded, like so crowded that even if you knew everybody in the elevator, it's still uncomfortable? Let alone they were all strangers? Well, so my son and I, we go to Philadelphia and we park in one of those really overpriced Center City parking garages, right? And the only way out is the elevator or to walk the big circle all the way down. So we get in the elevator, and of course, it's full. But we were saved, because you know how when you get in an elevator, people, all they do is they turn around and they look where? Up. And they watch the lights on the numbers. We didn't have to do that in this elevator, because when you walk in, the whole back of it was glass. And so everybody was staring out the glass, and we didn't have to talk. It was perfect. So we got down to the bottom, we got out in the lobby, and we escaped that horrible thing of having to speak to a stranger. And so we get out of the lobby, and there is my son's girlfriend. She was waiting for us. And within like seconds, she remembers she forgot something in the car, and her car is back up in the garage. So she literally jumps into the elevator, which of course is full again. There's a whole family in there. They've got the stroller, all the paraphernalia, a whole bunch of kids around their ankles, and she jumps in, and just before the doors close, we hear my son's girlfriend say, "So what are you doing today?" She was talking to strangers. And the door closes, and of course I told you the wall was glass, right? So the elevator takes flight, and there is my son's girlfriend. And her hands are going, and her arms are going, big smile on her face, and she's just, what's going on? What'd you do today? We're going to the auto show. I'm here with my boyfriend. She's carrying. It was only like 3 or 4 flights, but I think she knew the entire life story of that family. The typical elevator. The one where we get in, it's really crowded, and we just stare at the numbers as they light up. That's just a small sample of the world that we live in today. Our world today is a very unfriendly kind of establishment. It's where being anonymous behind a computer screen is what we desire. Text over voice is what we seek. It's where we're all striving for independence and we don't want to be connected or dependent on someone else. An elevator is where we get into a really crowded place with other people and still not experience any sense of community or connection. I found, speaking with people as I counsel, that, we can be part of a company, we can be part of a club, we can be part of a church, and yet people will still come to me and say they don't feel connected. We can work in an office for years. We can be part of a neighborhood or a group that shares a hobby or a sport. For some, we can even be part of a family living in the same house and still not experience any significant relationships in our life. This was not the case with someone in the Bible by the name of Paul. Apostle Paul was not like this at all. Paul was born in a town called Tarsus, and when he was born, his name was Saul. And Saul moved around quite a bit as he was growing up, schooling and education in terms of vocation and where his family was living and how they journeyed and traveled. And then one day he met Jesus of Nazareth. And his life was changed. Not only his life was changed, his name was changed, and so was his address. He was now called Paul, and Paul began his missionary journeys all around the region. But with Paul, he had a very specific desire in his life. Everywhere he went, Paul gathered a group of people. A small group, if you will. He gathered them together and shared with them what he knew about Jesus. And as they all became believers, they gathered together regularly with encouragement and support and helping one another. Today we call them churches. But I think that does a great injustice. Because when I say the church to you, you tend to think this. And that's not what Paul was about. Paul was about this as the church. And he gathered these people in small groups so that they would come together to support one another, because Paul knew, and they knew, life was going to get tough. And they needed support and help and encouragement to get through the tough times. And as Paul left these small groups and went to the next place and established a new one, and then went to the next place and established a new one, he would write letters to those whom he missed, those whom he had started these groups and then moved on. He would write back. He would stay connected with them. And those letters have become part of our Bible. Letters like Galatians and Ephesians and Philippians. These are just personal letters from Paul to a small group. So our scripture reading today comes from a letter called Thessalonians. It was a letter written to those who lived in that region who had started a small group. And this letter happens to be one of Paul's most intimate, most personal letters. Paul's coming to the end of his own life. And in verse 7, he wrote, "We were gentle among you, like a mother, tenderly caring for her own children." I wonder how many of you have friendships like that? Because Paul used this same kind of relationship in many of his letters. To the people in Corinth, the letter's called Corinthians, he wrote, "So the eye cannot say to the hand, 'I don't need you,' nor the head cannot say to the feet, 'I don't need you.' On the contrary, all the more, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are necessary." Paul said the need that we have for others and being in relationship, it runs deep. So deep, it's part of who you are, and it's how God created you. You can't turn away from it. He said, just look back to Genesis. The very first book in the Bible, in chapter 2, he said, "It is not good for man to be alone." And he created a partner. God created relationship. That's how much of a core it is to who you are. He didn't create just one human being to be a friend with God. He created two so that they wouldn't be apart. They wouldn't be alone. And it's not just about marriage. It's about our whole life. It's about how we connect with others and why. We need relationships. We need them. Movies today and recently have joked about the idea that you complete me. I need you. I'm only half. All of those kinds of things point back to Genesis chapter 2. Legos. Who here has ever played with a Lego? Did you know Legos, when they were first created, all they did was stack on top of each other? They were just stacking blocks. That's all they were. But then, someone realized how important it was for them to connect. And now, no matter what color, what size, what shape, no matter what function that Lego brick, block, door, window, whatever it is, they connect, don't they? They all connect. Now, not all Legos are exactly alike, are they? We even have pink ones now. For all you girls who are holding out. My son just got Legos for Christmas. From his girlfriend. A car. It has moving pistons, it has doors, it has rear view mirrors. I mean, you name it, it's there. And yet, for some magical way, they all connect. No matter how different. Tall, short, red, blue, pink. Each function. But when he opened the box, I thought, oh, there's like 1,000 pieces. And when it's all together, it makes one beautiful model. They all come together to connect. You know, in the New Testament, it speaks of salvation, our salvation. But every time it does speak about salvation, it never speaks about it being an individual experience. Salvation for one. It's salvation for all. Paul wrote in another letter he was writing to the Ephesians, he says, "Together we are his house, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets. And the cornerstone of this building is Jesus Christ himself." We are carefully joined in him, becoming a holy temple. I like to think we're each a Lego. And Jesus Christ holds us all together in the way we're connected. And God is creating something beautiful. A masterpiece when it's all together. Paul's first proclamation in this letter to the people in Thessalonica is that admit it, you need relationships. Admit it. You know, also over the holidays when we were taking a little break, everybody in the family was gathered around the kitchen table. You ever do that? And they're all building one puzzle. 7 people, 14 hands working together to create one picture. The TV was on in the other room, and we could hear what was happening on the TV, and there came a commercial on the TV. It was promoting a new season of a TV show. They call it a reality show. It's called The Bachelor. Anyone? Yeah, right? They call this reality. And the premise of the show is that one guy meets a whole bunch of women, and then in a very short period of time, he has to pick one to offer his vow of marriage and a lifelong commitment. And again, my son's girlfriend, he's getting in here. She pipes up and she says, "That's ridiculous." She says, "That's the problem with my friends. They all think that these relationships just pop out of nowhere and are these beautiful things." She said, "It takes time. I'm still working on your son."
She's a keeper.
Now, I'm not disparaging the customs in the world where, marriages are set and families work very hard at picking a lifelong mate. But this goes way beyond that. This goes to relationships of not just marriage, but also family, friends, and coworkers. We can't take relationships so lightly and think that they just pop into our world and that we don't have to work at it. We're too involved in this me-first kind of culture. We're too involved in the text over talk, and we just want to get our word and post it and not bother with a response. Relationships don't just happen, they require effort. Taking time to cultivate a relationship was Paul's secret ingredient as he traveled as a missionary. You don't think he just had people come out for coffee and handed them some money and said, "Okay, I want you to start meeting together." It takes hard work. In verse 8, he wrote this. He said, "We cared so much for you that we were pleased to share with you not only the gospel of God," which is what most people thought Paul was all about. They thought Paul went around preaching the gospel of God, and somehow magic happened, and poof, we all became related to one another. But Paul says in his very own letter, "We were pleased to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives." When they came together, they fed one another, they clothed one another, they supported one another, they cared for one another. They stuck through it when a member of the group showed up and was in a bad mood. They stuck through it when someone was persecuted. They stayed together and they worked on it. And you know, when Paul wrote his letters, it wasn't just like from Paul on high. No, when Paul writes a letter, he says, "Hi, I'm Paul, and I'm here with." And he names all of his friends who are sitting there with him as he's writing the letter. And he says, "We care for you. We shared our lives with you. We are connected. And we share the gospel of God." You know, if you want to know if you're someone who's like Paul, who's cultivating some deep relationships in your life, if you're thinking, I have relationships, I'd like you to ask a couple of questions. Think of a relationship you have now in your life. Get that into your mind. And then ask yourself this: do you care? You know, it was Theodore Roosevelt who said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Do you care for that person? Or are they on your calendar to make sure you text? Do you share, like Paul said? Paul said, we were pleased to share our lives. Do you share your life? Do you get close and personal with the person in the relationship that you're thinking of? Do you move beyond the computer screen and the behind your smartphone, and do you actually get face to face? Do you laugh and cry with that person? And finally, Paul asks, do you dare? Do you dare to communicate your affection and your attachment? Do you tell them how much they mean to you? You know, deep relationships, there's a lot less talking even in them. We do this, we share and we communicate, we express our affection, and then as we move into deeper levels, it's less about talk and it's more about action. A hug and a handshake goes a lot farther. Your presence goes a lot farther. Cultivating deep relationships, it's kind of like cultivating the soil for a farmer. It requires labor. And Paul would say it requires a labor of love. So Paul says we need to admit that we need relationships. And then we need to cultivate them. We need to work on them. And then he says, you know what? You need to get real with it. You need to be authentic about this. Don't just scratch the surface. Just don't do the minimum amount you need to do. Go beyond that how you doing text. Go beyond that one card that you send where you sign your name to the bottom of it. That's not caring, that's not sharing, and that's not daring to communicate. You know, someone that you're in a deep relationship with, they probably don't care what you're doing at 1 o'clock in the morning when you post it. A deep relationship is one where we can stand the test of time. Paul's small group stood the test of persecution. When they got together, it was life-threatening. And they stayed together. We can't get together because our calendars conflict. Paul's group overcame relationship recession. The time when everything seems to be sucked out of it, all the joy and all the fun, they continued to keep moving together. We need to get beyond this idea that we're in relationship behind a computer screen. We need to get beyond the idea that just because I texted someone, we're now friends. I don't care who says how many friends you have. We need to work at it and cultivate it. And when we do that, the only way to make it real is to be authentic. And here's how we do it. We know that the other person has value. And you know how we know that? Because we have value. And you know how we know that? Because God created us. God created you. And you, and you, and you. God doesn't create junk. He creates value. And when you see the other person in your relationship as someone God created with deep value, then it becomes authentic. Then it becomes real. Then our connection can stand the tough times. Either in the relationship or all the stuff that's coming from the outside. Now, I admit you're going to get a little bit of that V word that we're all so afraid of. There's vulnerability. You have to get vulnerable to do this. You have to open your heart. But the reward of opening your heart to God, and the reward of opening your heart to another. We need to admit that we need relationships, and then we need to work at it. We need to cultivate it. Do you care? Do you share? And do you dare? And then we got to be real about it. It's got to be authentic in order for this to work. When you came in this morning, we asked you to pick up a piece of the puzzle that's there. One puzzle piece. You know, when the puzzle box was opened over Christmas and it was dumped out on the table, it was just a mess. And people started picking up different pieces, and we're looking at them, and we're trying to figure out where they go and where they fit. And so when you look at your puzzle piece this morning, you may think of yourself when you look at that piece. And perhaps you think you don't belong. But you do, because every piece has another piece that fits together perfectly. You know, you may look at that piece and you may have no idea what the picture is. It may be all one color, or maybe it's a whole bunch of colors and you simply can't tell what it is. But when the pieces come together, then we get to see the big picture. You may look at that piece and think, wow, it's got holes and parts and there's just no way this is going to fit together, and it's very odd, and it probably doesn't look like the piece that the person next to you is holding. But they all come together because God intended it that way. Brothers and sisters, we need to start breaking down the barriers. We need to start opening ourselves up and working hard, labor of loves and building relationships, so that all the pieces can fit together. Because who knows, maybe that person you're standing next to in the elevator is the piece that fits. Maybe you're not standing on that elevator next to that person by accident. There are people out there that are just waiting to connect with you. There are people out there who need to know you. Today, let's take your puzzle piece. Let's go out and build a beautiful picture by connecting them all together.